Okay, good morning, everyone. Wow, it looks like I'm sitting in the dark, which I guess I am. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Thursday, day before Friday. Oh, day before the quiz. We have a quiz tomorrow. No, I almost forgot. Almost forgot. Um, yeah, so quiz tomorrow. So at least in-class people get to sleep in an hour if they so choose. But online people I'll see bright and early at 8 o'clock. Yeah, that'll be fun, right?
Very.
Yeah, maybe not, eh? Um, okay, so Zartaj is here. Good morning, Zartaj. Kayla's here. Good morning. Or sorry, yeah, Kayla's here. Good morning, Kayla. And Jesse is here. Good morning. Good morning, Jesse. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, and Alicia's here too. Good morning, Alicia. You just kind of squeaked in there. Um, let's see. So yesterday, where were we? We were talking about, yes, the documentary of what is kind of standing in the way of women being equal to men. And so, uh, let's talk about a few of the things that we heard yesterday. Who do you want to start with?
Mira?
Mira? Okay. What did we hear anything more from Mira? Oh, a little bit.
Her dad is still like on the, I guess, traditional and conservative side.
Yeah.
She's not allowed to socialize with girls which are liberals and who don't wear the hijab.
Yeah, that's what that gets said. Yeah. Okay, so Mira's father Marwan is kind of he wants to know who she's spending time with, right? He wants to be able to know those families and make sure that their values align with his, right? Um, what else gets said by Mira or Mira's friends? Do you remember they're getting their nails done, I think, at the end, her and Mira and one of her friends getting their nails done. Do you remember what they're talking about?
Yeah, they're expected to be cooking at home, taking care of children, and doing house chores.
Yeah, and what does Mira's friend kind of say about that? Sorry, this is a little detail. Little detail. I think she says something to the effect of, well, this is just kind of the way things are, and you just have to get used to it, kind of thing, right? Um, what about? Let's go to who do you want to talk about next? Let's talk about Shui Shui next. So, what do we hear from Shui Shui?
Her uncle and her mom are like, yeah, we'll let her do what she wants, but we'll tell her like it's basically freedom but not freedom.
Well, yeah, it's a little unclear what's going to happen, right? When Shui Shui is old enough to get married or when she wants to. It's not quite clear if, her family is going to try and tell her what to do or if they'll tell her what is traditional or if they'll just let her do what she wants. It seems like it's still being worked out, right, within the family. Um, do you remember the talk that Shui Shui and her mom are having? They're kind of sitting on some steps outside of a
Oh,
building.
the
HIV.
HIV and what's it, STD? No, I'm not.
Yeah, they're kind of having the sex talk, in a way, right? Which I feel bad for Shui Shui because that's an awkward enough conversation without a camera crew filming it while you're trying to have it. So, poor kid, right? Um, but they made it through okay. And so yeah, so what are some of the things that her mom is trying to communicate to her? Or if you want to answer this question, have you had the same talk with one of your parents? And how did that go? No.
Never.
No? Edel? No?
Oh,
What's that?
about what?
About like sex and boys and
Oh, boys?
STIs and things like that.
I have.
You've had that talk with mom or
Yeah,
parents?
my mom is kind
She's what?
Wondering.
Okay. So was it a like a good conversation, or was it awkward, or?
It was kind of awkward
Yeah.
at first, but then I was like, it's like natural, which made me like ashamed of.
Yeah, it's true. But yeah, sometimes it can feel a little
Yeah.
weird, right? Um, so if you don't, we're the same. Did you and your mom talk about the same kind of things that Shui Shui and her mom talked about?
I didn't watch the video actually.
Okay.
Because yesterday I was so sick.
That's right.
But can you tell me what they?
Yeah. So she was what Shui Shui was kind of talking about the fact that how did she phrase it? She said she said that that she was concerned about Shui Shui because she was worried that she might be pressured to have sex by boys, and so her mom was worried that maybe she wouldn't be strong enough to say no, and you have to be careful because if you make a mistake, you can get HIV, and that can affect your whole life, and so it's this one little mistake can have a big effect, and so you have to be careful. I think that was all we heard, right? There's certainly more to talk about for them, but that's all we heard from them. Did you kind of hear
the same talk.
similar things?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's like typical thing to talk about. So.
I think it is, right? I think there's a there's an agenda to that meeting usually, right? There's things that get talked about. My question to you though, and we saw Shui Shui and her mom having that talk, and I assume that many young women around the world have had that talk with a parent or a loved one or a teacher, or somebody has had that conversation with them. But do you think that conversation is happening with young men as well? You think yes?
But not with moms. Yeah.
Not with mom, yeah. But with dad, do you think the same things are getting said, or what do you think is getting said in the talks with young men?
Among young men or young men and their fathers?
Young men and their fathers. If that conversation happens.
I think it's different.
Yeah.
I don't think fathers would like tell their sons like, careful, don't, if the girl asks you and say no and stuff, if you're not ready, you can get HIV and stuff, you can get the girl pregnant. I don't think the father would say that.
What do you think the father would say?
I think the father will say, like, why do parents need to their child to make like someone pregnant or to get like.
Why do they need to?
Hmm?
Why do they need to? Is that what you
Yeah.
said? Okay.
Like, I think the same talk will be like with the father and the boy and with the mom and the daughter.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. What do you think? How do you think those conversations go? Eunice and Nadi.
Maybe more relaxed.
Maybe more relaxed?
Yeah.
Maybe. One of the things that I wanted to kind of highlight here, and I don't have any data to support this, but one of the things that stood out to me, like Shui Shui's mom was telling her about STIs and AIDS, and again, that's all good information and things that she should know about, especially since the narrator mentions that Lesotho has a reasonably high rate of HIV. It's definitely something to be aware of, right? But the other thing she says is that she's concerned that guys will want to have sex with her, and she will not be strong enough to say no, right? Which is kind of an interesting thing, right? Especially in the context of what we saw earlier with those predatory romance things, right? We saw in movies that men kind of, at least in movies, continue to push until they kind of get what they want, right? And so Shui Shui's mom is kind of acknowledging that and saying, look, you're going to have to push back and say no. But my question to you, and maybe you don't have an answer to this, but my question to you is, are young men having this same talk with their fathers or teachers or whoever, or even their moms? And are they getting told, look, don't pressure someone into having sex with you, right? Like you can't push someone into doing it, and if you can, you shouldn't, right? This is not how relationships are formed, right? Don't push someone into something they're not ready for. But I wonder, and you may not have the answer for this, I don't have it, but I wonder how many young men are being given that message, right? Because women are being given the message, look, you're going to have to say no, right? You're going to have to be strong. Shui Shui's mom is worried that she's not going to be strong enough, right? But similarly, are young men being given the message of, look, it's not the woman's job to police sexual behavior, right? You have to, if she's not ready, don't push her into it, right? Don't kind of keep trying until you get a yes, like we see in some movies, right? But again, I wonder if young men are getting the same talk, or a talk that is complementary to the talk that girls are getting. I remember in this class once, I forget who it was, but one student said, oh yeah, we got this talk at school, right? The teachers kind of told us all this stuff at school, and they took all the girls aside to a classroom and sat them down and had the talk, and the boys went out and played soccer, right? And I was like, oh, very interesting, right? So now the young women are being given, the information, and they're in charge of it, and young men are getting nothing, right? They're getting no information. They're getting no kind of coaching in relationships, or how not to push people into doing things that they're not ready to do. They just got sent out to play soccer, right? So again, I don't have any data on this, but it's worth watching this conversation with Shui Shui and her mom, and wondering, Shui Shui is getting information to protect herself, right? Against HIV, against a pregnancy that she might not want, or just against being pushed into doing something that she's not ready to do. But again, are we teaching our young men the same thing, right? And undoubtedly some are, right? Some families, some fathers are definitely doing that. But is everybody, right? Or are we just leaving, young men to figure it out? Or are we expecting them to know? Or are they learning it from the internet somewhere, right? That's a bit of a concern, right? And again, this documentary is all about girls, so we're not going to see any of that in here, but I wonder, right? I wonder. What do we hear from Vigdis? Vigdis is having coffee with her mom, I think. Oh, wow.
Oh my gosh.
Being swarmed by seagulls here. Somebody must have dropped a bag of McDonald's or something. Well, yeah, do you remember what her mom is talking? Her mom, and then they're in the kitchen, right? Her father and her brother are making a big breakfast for everybody. Do you remember what they're talking about? Either one of those things. Sorry, it's hard when we watch the video one day and then talk about it the next. It's more difficult. What are they saying?
I think the mom and her were talking that there is a level of freedom they have, but there's still many things that you have to do.
Yeah, right. Yeah, her mom was saying when her mom kind of got out of school and entered the workforce, she kind of thought that that sexism wouldn't be a problem, right? She just thought if she worked hard enough, it would overcome any sexism issues. But she said she kind of found out that, oh, that wasn't the way it was, right? She was kind of held back in a number of ways, right? And so she's, she felt kind of disappointed, right? And she says, she's looking at her daughter, who's now, going to go to school and then go into the workforce, and she says, unfortunately, there's still a lot for you to do, right? There was a lot of things that I didn't think would be an issue that were, and they'll be for her daughter to fix, right? And then her dad and her brother are making breakfast there, and they're talking about they're kind of talking about marriage and single people. And is this ringing a bell? Marriage and single people and women's responsibilities. Ding ding, no. Okay, they're talking about the idea that certainly lots of people are choosing to stay single and kind of live on their own, but her brother is mentioning that women often have all of the housework to do as well, right? So women can now go out there and they can go to school, they can get careers, they can be pretty much whatever they want to be, right, in their lives, but the home and family responsibilities still fall to women much of the time, right? And again, some of that is biological, right? Men cannot have babies, right? So there's no, if you want to have a family, there's no choice about who's going to become pregnant, right? Man, we lucked out on that one. Yeah, pregnancy is that's some serious stuff. If guys were the ones who got pregnant and women didn't, I think our species would end. I think like men would have like a few babies and then they're like, dude, I'm not doing that again. That was the worst. And then like our species would just like, that would be it. Fortunately, women are much tougher than men are, because men would not put up with that very long. Anyway, that's just my own personal musing. Right. So yeah. So there's a biological thing, right? Only women can have babies, but most of the childcare, most of the kind of paying attention to school, most of the shopping, most of the cleaning, that stuff predominantly falls to women, right? So of course we've said, yeah, women they can go to university, they can have any training they want, they can have any career they want, they can do whatever they want, but there's still these responsibilities that they are not free of, right? And very few, in most households, men do not do half of the household chores, right? They do less than that, right? And so women have this kind of dual pressure, right? To go out and have a career and be successful, but also, there's this home stuff as well. Does that, seeing as there are 3 women in the classroom right now, does that strike you as true? Or do you think that's the case? Or is that not the case? Yeah, is it the case that women have kind of dual pressure now, right? They have pressure to go out and get a career and sort of have a life, but then there's all this home stuff that they will be, that they will be responsible for too.
Double the work.
What's that?
Double the work.
Yeah, it's kind of double the work,
Because
right?
back then, I think there's not many women working, right? Like back in the old times.
Yeah.
It was like.
Well, I know the old times for you is
staying
like
at home.
2000, but still, just teasing.
Women staying at home and doing house chores, like men going out finding the money. It's like I thought, and back then too, I think women were in some countries women weren't allowed to go to school, right?
Yeah.
In my country it was back then, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, or certainly, at the very best in the past, women would have, the household stuff would have been their responsibility, and sometimes they would have, been able to go to school and get a university education. But then once they get married, that's it, right? Good morning. They're not expected to go out and work and have a career. They're supposed to be at home, right? Regardless of what university or training they had, right? So, yeah, once upon a time, we had a situation where women did all the housework and men did all the outside of the housework, right? And then we said, okay, well, women can do that stuff too. They can go out and have a career, but men didn't wind up taking half of the household chores, right? And the child rearing duties, right? And of course, in some ways they can't because of the whole pregnancy thing. But still, women have, Eunice, like you said, they have a double pressure, right? They have to, they have their careers to worry about, but then, they also have to clean the bathroom at home, right? Because they're not getting equal help, right? Does that, if you don't mind answering this, does that reflect like in your household or kind of in your like people around you, or not so much?
I don't think for not well in my house. No, I don't think so.
No?
Both my parents are working.
Yeah.
And at home we mostly have like maids to do the housework for us and like go clean the house and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and that makes sense, right? For people who are, who have good careers and make good money, it doesn't make sense for them to, stay home 2 days a week just to do the cleaning, right? It's cheaper to hire someone else to do it rather than to give up 2 of your productive days, right? And actually, to be honest, my partner and I have like a fantasy of eventually we'll have someone to come in like once every 2 weeks and just like, just do the stuff that takes a long time.
House,
Like just
house
do
cleaning.
Yeah, just do like the bathroom and the kitchen kind of thing, just to get it clean, because otherwise you wind up spending like half of your weekend doing this stuff, and it's like, ugh, you finally get your weekend and then you spend it all day like.
But if you like cleaning, then I think it's a different thing.
Yeah. Does anyone
I
here?
like cleaning.
You like cleaning? You're hired, Eunice.
Gladly.
Does anyone here like cleaning? Unadi, Edel, Dunya? No, not into it. Me neither. My partner really likes. She really likes it when things are clean.
Same.
But she seems really unhappy while she's doing the cleaning. So she's vacuuming and she's like, ah, and she's, trying to get stuff off the floor. And I feel like she gets really grumpy in the process. But then when it's done, she feels really good about it, right? She's really happy. But while she's cleaning, it's a bit of a process. But where were we? Yeah. So, but that, predominant. And does that sound true to you?
Yeah.
Anadi?
My mom doesn't work. She's a housewife.
Yeah. So you still kind of have that division, right?
Yeah.
Which again is I guess is okay, right? If everyone is happy with that and it's kind of a.
My mom is very happy.
She's very happy with that?
Yeah, she just has to sit and the house head does the housework. And the only thing she has to do is cooking and cleaning now.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
you have a housekeeper to do the
Yeah.
bigger stuff?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that's yeah.
So
That's
she's like, no, like.
that sounds great.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Maybe I can try that. I do like to cook, and I can clean like a little bit here and there. I can do that.
Yeah.
Maybe I could be a house husband.
Because many people come to Kenya just for that. Just
Mm.
like you get house help very easily here.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could be a house husband. What do you think? No?
I don't know.
You don't know? I think I'd make a great house husband. Staying at home, cooking, a little vacuuming here and there. No? No?
No idea.
Okay.
You can if you want to. No one's stopping you.
No one stop. Well, actually, that's not true. There is one person stopping me. My partner. She's like, you're not being a house. I don't think she'd want me to be a house husband. I think she's called dibs on that lifestyle. I'll have to go out and work.
Dibs.
Yeah. Okay, so Mira, so Vigdis. And one more thing that Vigdis mentions is, and again, let me know if this rings true to you or not. But she says, now that women, are kind of out in the workforce and can kind of have any career they want, she was saying she kind of felt like the expectations were higher, right? Like she really had to do something with her life, right? Like if she and a young man, if they sort of attain the same level of success, somehow that would be like disappointing for her because people had such high expectations for her, right? Whereas those expectations don't so much exist for men. Does that feel true to you? Do you agree with her, or what do you think? Do you think people have higher expectations for girls than they do for boys?
Somehow.
Yeah? Why do you think that is?
I mean, many people say that she chose to do work and now she is not doing well at work. So how is she successful?
Oh, that's interesting, right? So it's like it's almost like the feeling of like, well, you could have just, stayed home and been a housewife, but instead you chose to go out into the world of work, and now you're, like what are you doing, right? Interesting. Does that sound true? Like that kind of feeling, or I don't know. You got to tell me. I don't know what it's like to be a girl, right? I've been a guy my entire life. I kind of know what that's like, sort of. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it's like to be a girl.
I think, well, in my family,
Mm-hmm.
men are more like expected to do better.
Okay. There's a higher expectation on men than women
Well, in my family,
in your family.
my brother's like being. Well, maybe because he's older, he's like they're like telling him like just graduate, get a job and stuff, and I've never been told to like
Get a job.
graduate and get a job. Maybe because I've always been the like independent one. Like
Oh, okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I've already told my mom like I want to go to this school. I want to work like this, and then like I got my life plan. But maybe because my brother is more messy.
Right. They're worried if they don't push him, he'll slack off.
Yeah.
Okay, that could be. Yeah, and that's important to point out too, right? There are some societal wide patterns, but every family's a little different. Children are different, right? Some are very motivated and they're go-getters, and some kind of slack off, and you got to push them a little more.
Yeah,
and,
it's like my brothers.
yeah, everyone's a little different, right? And every family's a little different. But still, sometimes there are these society-wide patterns that still exist, right? Okay, Vigdis, Mira, Shui, and Lulu.
From the UK.
Yeah. So the girl from the UK, they were talking about some of their experiences at school, and then the narrator there, Christian, was talking to those two young guys in the alleyway. They were kind of smoking in the alleyway, and he was talking to them. Remember those two guys? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff we can talk about. Those guys, in like 2 minutes, those guys said enough stuff for us to talk for an hour, but let's start with, so one of the things that so Christian, the narrator, was saying, well, he said, I'm hearing from some of the girls that I talk to that they're getting a lot of sexual comments made about them, right? A lot of comments about their appearance and how good they look or whatever. And Dunya, what was their response to that? One of the guys? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so one of the guys said, well, if they don't want those comments, why get all dolled up, right? Why wear makeup if you don't want the attention, right? Why? And so, how did that strike you there, Dunya? What's that? Oh, okay. So, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Are you telling me, Dunya, that women dress up and wear makeup for reasons other than men? That's what you're telling me?
They do it to
Really?
make themselves happy. Not
You all think this?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
To make their confidence like higher and stuff.
I know. I'm acting surprised and making a big deal out of this, but yeah, exactly, right? Women dress up and wear makeup for reasons other than men, right? They dress up to make themselves feel good, right? And empowered. Don't you feel much better when you're all dressed up and your hair is perfect and you're like, "Hey, good morning."
Morning.
And yeah, like what do you feel a lot better.
It's not for the man.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, right?
It's not for
Yeah, maybe some attention here and there, but
Yeah.
like for most part, it's just for the
Right. So, yeah, sometimes women might dress up to impress men or maybe a particular man, but yeah, for the most part, they dress up and wear makeup because they want to look good, right? They want to feel pretty and confident, right? And empowered. And so that's kind of an interesting statement for him to make, right? What other things do those guys say? Or if you want to talk more about that, that's okay too.
I can't remember.
Actually, maybe one more thing about, if they shouldn't wear makeup if they don't want those comments. What is he actually doing when he says that? That guy. What's that?
He's the one that looks
He's the one.
like yeah. He doesn't know why he's saying that.
Yeah, clearly, right? He's clearly kind of, yeah, he's looking and then also saying stuff, but he's also he's making that her fault, right? Like he's saying inappropriate things to young women, right? Saying things that they really don't want to hear or talk about, right? Lulu and her friends are talking about how guys are talking about porn and, oh, I just watched this porn and did you watch this? And they're talking about all this stuff and the girls are like, we don't want to hear about this stuff. We don't want to talk about it. But he's saying, well, if they don't want to talk about that, then why are they dressing, in an attractive manner? So he's making that her fault, right? If they don't want those comments, then they shouldn't dress that way, right? And I can't help but kind of hear the same thing. Remember when we saw that video on predatory romance, right? Remember with the Blade Runner clip where Rick Deckard
Oh,
slammed the door
that
and
one.
he told Rachel to kiss him, right?
Forcefully.
Yeah, forcefully, and then said, "Now now say kiss me," right? So he was trying to make that assault her fault, right? Because that's what she said. And here, again, this is a scaled down version, but I kind of see the same dynamic happening here, right? Women are being made responsible for men's behavior, right? Rick Deckard in the clip is sexually assaulting Rachel, and he's trying to make it Rachel's fault, right? And here, these two guys are effectively sexually harassing their female classmates, and they're trying to make it her fault, right? Why do they wear that stuff, right? Why do they, dress themselves up? If you don't want that, then just, don't wear any makeup or don't look nice, right? Do you see what I'm saying? Same dynamic here, right? Again, not quite the same thing, right? There's a level of seriousness here that's different, but still, women are subjected to poor treatment and men are trying to make it their fault, right? So those guys are trying to do that. What else did they talk about, those guys? I almost laughed out loud when they were talking about watching porn, and they're like, it just happens. It's like, yeah, just happens, right? Whoops. I saw porn today. Whoops. Yeah. Kind of ridiculous. Do you see that? They didn't seem to have any problem saying that they watch porn, and I suspect they probably watch a reasonable amount.
Yeah.
Do you think that's problematic? Do you think that's a problem, or should they Is that what they do in their private time is their own business, or what do you think?
Well, it's up to them. Like they do what they want to do, but
Sure.
I think that it's wrong to make it look like the girl's fault for wearing makeup and dress the way she wants to, because the guys also have to learn how to be respectful and control the way they speak.
Yeah. And that's a great point, right? So Eunice says, yeah, guys also have to learn how to be respectful, right? But again, where are they learning that? I wonder, right? Those two guys in the alleyway kind of show me that in a lot of cases they're not, right? Because they don't get it, right? Those two guys don't get it. And again, when we look at some movies, we see the same messages, right? And sometimes they're played out in fictional ways, right? Sometimes they're more serious, right? And so what Rick Deckard did to Rachel in that clip was a serious thing, right? These guys, making, sexual comments toward women is less serious, but still, it's still a problem, right? But yeah, like where are men getting that coaching, right? That training? They're not getting it from movies, right? And if they're not getting it from their parents or their fathers, and sometimes they are, but I would suggest in a lot of cases they're not, then they're just kind of left to figure it out on their own, right? And they're watching movies, they're watching porn, and porn is much more disrespectful of women than, Harrison Ford movies are, right? And so, yeah, think about where the social messages are coming from, right? For women and for men, right? And who's being taught what, right? And again, this is about women, right? This is about girls, but I will take a time out and saying that young men are being failed here as well, right? Because they're not getting the sort of support and information that they need, right? And they're causing a lot of pain and frustration for themselves and for young women because they're not getting good messaging, right? They don't have good role models sometimes, right? Some do, right? Some young men do, which is awesome, but some don't, right? And so, yeah. Oh yeah, back to my original thing. Do you think it's a problem for these young men to watch porn or to excessively watch porn? What is it?
Oh,
Sexually explicit movies.
18 plus.
Yeah, movies of people having sex. Yeah. Do you think that's a problem for them to watch excessively? Or would you just rather not talk about this?
Is excessively like daily, like often? Like does it?
Yeah. Like, I'm sure it's not disrupting their lives. Like, I'm sure they're not missing school because they're watching porn. But I mean, I'm sure they're watching it regularly.
I'm not too sure.
Okay. We don't have to go into that if it's
No,
not.
it's not because it makes me uncomfortable, but I'm just confused.
That's okay. I guess my question, and maybe I'll just leave the question for you, is, is it, if we have pornography which is, very sexually explicit, but also full of sexist and racist ideas, is it a good idea for young people to be watching that, for an hour a day, right? Is that necessarily a good thing, right? And again, this is a bit of a moral issue as well, right? Because sexuality is, has very strong rules around it in every culture. So, the act of having sex with someone or watching it on film, there's a lot of kind of moral, taboo, uncomfortableness that goes with that. But, also at the same, for our purposes here, it's also transmitting racist and sexist messages, right? And misogynistic messages, right? And in some cases, things that would, in the real world would very clearly be sexual assault, right? But in the fantasy world of porn, of course, it's not, right? Just the same as in the fantasy world of Blade Runner, it's not sexual assault either, it's romantic, right? Because the romantic music comes up in the background, and then we know that, oh, this is all very romantic, it's not a sexual assault, right? Okay, so maybe the last question, what is actually standing in the way of women being equal to men? What's the barrier here? What's the roadblock?
It's
It's
the society.
the society? How do you mean?
Like the way that they treat men, they treat the women the same way how they treat men.
Yeah.
Maybe just because like men are stronger than women, but otherwise everything is the same. And I think women like they get like not to say that, but they get mature earlier than men.
Very true. Well, yeah, that's the thing, right? Is that we are kind of different, right? And I think that's one of the challenging things about thinking about equality is that, men and women actually are a little bit different, right? We're very similar in, 99% of, like on Earth, there is nothing more similar to a human female than a human male, right? We're very similar, but we do have some differences, right? And so, how do we account for those differences in an equitable kind of way, right? That's the trick, right? So yeah, like how we treat men, how we treat women, that's kind of standing in the way. What else would you say here? Why do we not have equality? There's a few answers I think we could have for this, maybe. Why do we not have equality?
Some people are still stubborn,
Oh, okay. Some people are still stubborn.
hard-headed people who do not want to listen and are not willing to, like, I guess, balance out the treatment
Yeah.
of men and women.
That's very worth saying, right? Some people don't want it, right? It's worth saying that we don't, sometimes people are like, "Oh, why don't we have equality? I really wish it was, we were equal." But it is worth saying that some people don't want that, right? Some people don't want to live in the world where men and women are equally empowered, right? Whether they kind of acknowledge that or not. Yeah, there are some people who just don't want that, right? And it's also worth saying that some of those people are women. I think more of them are men, but some of them are women, right? So society is standing in the way, our kind of treatment of men and women. Some people actually just don't want things to change, right? They want things to stay the same, or they want things the way they were in the past, right? What else? What else is standing in the way? Could I throw something in here and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong? I think one of the things standing in the way, I think, is education, right? Because a lot of people aren't educated about this kind of stuff, right? They don't know how to talk about this kind of stuff, right? They don't understand socialization, right? They don't understand culture. They don't understand privilege, right? They don't understand any of those things. They don't understand how oppression works, right? In other words, they haven't taken a class like this. And so if you don't understand all of this stuff, it's much more difficult to kind of see it, right? And it's much more difficult to understand and actually have a conversation about it, right? And I think that's sometimes where people get stuck, particularly when they start talking about racism, because sexism is less emotional. It's what?
Less talked about.
Less talked about and sometimes less emotionally volatile, right? Racism right now is a big deal, right? If you say a racist thing, it's right? There's huge reaction. But yeah, I think people don't really know how to talk about this stuff, right? And they don't understand it. And so either, they wind up just kind of yelling at each other, or they just try not to talk about it at all because they don't want to get in trouble, right? Or they don't want to cause issues. And you'll hear this sometimes. People talking about racism will say, "Oh, I don't want to talk about this because it's divisive, right? It divides people." And it's like, yeah, but people are divided already, right? Like if you don't talk about a problem, you can't fix it, right? If I refuse to acknowledge that there's a leak in the roof, if I refuse to look at it or acknowledge that it's there, can I ever fix it?
No.
No, right? You have to actually talk about the problem in order to solve it, right? And talking about the problem is not a problem in itself, right? Because if you just say, "Oh, this is divisive, we're not going to talk about it," the roof continues to leak, right? It continues to be a problem. And so, but as I say, I think education is another thing standing in the way, because people, once we're all done this class, you guys will have enough knowledge to actually talk about this stuff, right, with other people who will not understand it the way that you do, hopefully.
And argue with my mom.
Well, you don't necessarily have to argue with anyone, but what would you argue with her about?
No, because she's still on the not really conservative, but I guess yeah, probably more conservative than me. Like I'm
Yeah. Like in terms of gender or sexuality or other stuff?
gender stuff.
Yeah. She has.
Still different. The way she thinks is still more, I guess, traditional or like conservative. I'm more open to talking about that because
Yeah.
I'm afraid if I talk to my mom about that kind of issues, she's the talking won't stop. Like she'll
Yeah.
end up lecturing me about this, and yeah.
That is what I love about younger generations, like you guys, right? Because my generation and people older than me will say to you, "Look, this is how it is, right? Let me tell you how the world works," right? And your job, your generation's job, is to say, "Are you sure?" Right? So your job is to kind of push back, and I think, that's kind of how things get better, right? Because you've got a bunch of people, older people, who are like, "This is the way the world works. Everything's fine. We're just going to do this, and it's going to be okay." And then you have young people who are like, "No, I don't believe that," right? Or "I don't think that's a good idea," or "Are you sure about that?" And that's what's great about younger people, because they question ideas, right? They question the way things are. And that's good. That's good for everyone, because it's the same thing with the leak, right? If you don't question anything, you can't really solve any problems, right? And young people are very good at pointing out problems, right? Pointing out things that don't make sense, pointing out things that they don't agree with, right? And they do it even when they're young, right? Did you ever ask your parents, like, they told you couldn't do something, or they told you to do something, and you're like, "Why do I have to do this?" or "Why can't I do it?" And finally they're just like, "Ugh, because I said so."
Yeah.
Yeah. That's you in the process of questioning them, right? You're saying, I don't understand why this needs to be done or why I can't do this, right? Explain it to me, right? And of course, parents sometimes get tired and they just say, because I said so. But again, that's kind of your job, right? It's kind of your job to push us and say, are you sure? Why are we doing this? Why is this a good idea? Can't we do something different? Right? Anyway, want to take a little break? Okay. Let's take a little break. When we come back, I'll give you one example of a way in which women did gain more equality and more kind of power, and kind of how it went about and how it shows us some things about oppression, okay? But we'll do that when we come back. Let's take a break. Yeah. Okay, and we're back. So, is there any more that you would like to say about that little documentary? Is there anything else that stood out to you or that you wanted to talk about that we missed or forgot about? No, we're all good to sail on? Okay. Okay, so what I wanted to show you next is again, how this kind of sexism and oppression works with regard to one particular inequality, right? So I just wanted to refresh your memory here and say, of course, that patriarchy is kind of the idea that men are superior, right? And therefore they are in control of society and society's institutions, and so they shape society in a way that benefits them. And of course, this doesn't just apply to sexism, this applies to any form of oppression, right? So the dominant group will always try to, create society in a way that benefits themselves, and of course it winds up disadvantaging the minoritized group. But we'll go through this in a little more detail. So what I want to talk about here is women's suffrage. And so when we talk about suffrage, we talk about the right to vote. I don't know why it's called suffrage. I don't know why it sounds like suffering. It's a strange word. I don't know where it comes from. It's odd. But here we're talking about the right to vote. And so today in Canada and in the US, of course, women do have the right to vote as long as you're of a certain age. But that hasn't always been the case, right? There was a time here in Canada and in the US where only male citizens could vote, right? So I just want to look very quickly at the sort of process of women gaining the right to vote, how that worked, and what it tells us about oppression and patriarchy and dominant groups and all that kind of stuff, okay? So I'm going to assume that you know basically nothing about women gaining the right to vote here in Canada, and I think I'm probably correct in that assumption. So we'll just watch a very short video. It's about 3 or 4 minutes long, and it'll just give us a quick overview of how that process occurred, right? So we can just talk about, we can talk about suffrage and know a little bit about it, okay? So online people, the link is in Microsoft Teams, and there's just some questions. We'll just pay attention to what things are standing in the way of women's right to vote and how do they eventually achieve that, okay? So, online people, just watch the video and then come right back and we'll talk about it, okay? Okay, so that was not the video I thought it was gonna be. I had another video that was kind of more Canadian in theme, but I guess I swapped it out last term and I forgot that I changed it. But this one's good too, so no worries. But as I say, I thought it was going to be a different one, and I was surprised when it came on. But anyway, that's what makes teaching so exciting. What was standing in the way of these women's right to vote? What was standing in their way? Yeah, right. So the Constitution definitely was, right? So in the United States, it defined who was able to vote, and it was basically white male landowners, right? Which they said, shockingly, was as little as 6% of the population, right? So only 6% was voting and deciding, the fate of the nation, right? So yeah, the Constitution was standing in the way. And similarly, it was the same thing here in Canada. We had laws that stated not only that men were entitled to vote, but they specifically stated that women were not allowed. So just in case there was any confusion, they specifically wrote that no woman was allowed to vote, right? So the Constitution and laws were definitely a barrier, right? What other barriers were there? What other things kept women from being able to vote? I'm sorry, what? The government? In what way? Right. And was the government eager to change the rule? Like, I said, was the government eager to change the rule? Did they want to change it? Yeah, exactly, right? If they wanted to, they would have done it, right? But as you saw, it took decades, right? Decades of, letter writing and speeches and marches and some women going to jail, and it was a whole thing, right? And Dunya, like you said, if they wanted to change it, they would have just done it, right? But clearly, they didn't want to, right? And that brings us back to our earlier point of some people just don't want equality, right? That's one of the reasons we don't have it, is that some people don't want it. And clearly the government did not want it. What else might have stood in the way of women gaining the right to vote? What else? So we've got law, we've got government, we've got who or what else? Nothing? Let's see. Would you say that socialization probably played a role? People's ideas about gender and the roles of men and women?
They said that women is not childish, like more, how do you say it? I know this.
Well, they did say childish in the video, but there was more, yeah. They were like not capable of.
Yeah, voting.
Yeah.
They said that the women's obedience, I think, was that like they should, the husband and the wife agree to it, and the husband votes.
Yeah, right. So there was a lot of kind of very weak justifications of this situation, right? So the idea that, well, women were represented, right? They were represented by their husbands, right? There was the idea that, again, women were too childlike, right? Or not logical enough, too emotional, right? Or too kind of fragile and delicate for the tough world of politics, right? There was a lot of BS that people spread around that was, that was, various versions of that, right? Women are, not logical enough, not rational enough, childlike, too emotional, too fragile, blah, 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 right? There was a lot of this stuff floating around. So again, there was social messaging, right? Socialization. Probably a little something to do with gender roles as well, right? Men's world at the time, the man's world was outside of the house, right? It was the man who went out and worked and was sort of productive in society. The woman's world was the home, right? And so, it sort of made sense for the man to do the voting because that was kind of outside of the house, and women kind of had no business there, right? So, yeah, there was law, there was a government that really didn't want to make a change, but there was also society, right? There were social messaging and ideas about gender and roles and what women were actually like, right? And what men were like. And men were seen as logical and rational and tough-minded, right? And women were seen as emotional and flighty and just not capable of, making these tough choices, right? It's also worth saying that there was probably a lot of men who were against giving women the right to vote, but there were some women as well, right? Because again, everybody is subjected to the same social messages in society, right? So women receive all of those messages as well, and as we saw with Jane Elliott's class with the blue and brown-eyed kids, sometimes people believe those messages, right? So there were lots of women who felt that, yeah, it's okay. If I'm worried about who to vote for, I'll tell my husband and he'll vote that way, right? So I don't need to vote. I'll just tell my husband what I want, right? Some women did actually believe that, men were the better leaders, right? And men were more logical and rational, so they should be leading the country, right? And again, there's no real truth to that, but people believe social messages, right? So these suffragettes, these women who were fighting for the right to vote, they had to, overcome the law. They had to get the government to spring into action, but they also had to sort of push back against what society kind of felt, right? And again, it wasn't just men who were unsupportive of women's right to vote. In some cases, it was also women as well, right? So these suffragettes had to convince everybody, right? And as you can see, it took a long time, right? And it took a lot of work and effort. And here I am answering question number 2, which sometimes I do. But yeah, what did we see in terms of what tactics did they use to get there to gain the right to vote?
Write letters and voice out their opinions in public.
Yeah, so they were writing letters to, it's beautiful, but they were writing letters to their congresspeople, right, and their representatives, probably writing letters to newspapers as well. What else were they doing? We saw them in the street.
Poster.
What's that?
Like,
Yeah, marches,
yeah.
protests, right? Speeches in public, right? All of that stuff. Some women put on plays. There was a very famous one in Manitoba, in Canada, and I think it was in the 1920s, where some women who were at the forefront of this suffrage movement, they put on a play. They put on a public play, and in the play, women were the ones who had the right to vote, and men were the ones who couldn't. And there were men who were saying, we should have the right to vote in the play. And women were like, oh, can you imagine what would happen if we gave men the right to vote? They'd forget all about work and they'd just be involved in politics. And it was a big joke, right? It was a big kind of satirical, funny play. But it worked, right? It got people talking about giving women the right to vote, because in the play it seems so ridiculous that men would not be given the right to vote. So people also started to see how ridiculous it was that women weren't allowed to vote. Right? I'll say one more thing, and then I think I'll let you go because we do have a quiz tomorrow, and you seem all kind of, you look like unwatered plants out there. You're just like limp.
Unwatered.
Unwatered. The last thing I'll say is, it's interesting how race kind of weaves its way through here, right? And we haven't talked a lot about this, but this is what we're talking about here is intersectionality, right? So an intersection, usually we talk about where two roads cross, right? That's an intersection. Here we have an intersection between gender and race, right? So we see that we have women fighting for the right to vote, but even when they get the right to vote, it's not all women, right? It's white women, right? And so, you know, even when, I think it's in 1919, when white women are finally given the right to vote, as the video mentions, the fight's not over, right?
Black women.
Because, yeah, black women are not allowed to vote. Women of kind of Asian origin are not allowed to vote. Indigenous women are not allowed to vote, right? And so the fight continues. And as you saw, in some cases, it took until the 1960s for black women to gain the right to vote. And sadly, it was the same in Canada for black and for Indigenous women. I think it's sometime in the 1960s when they finally get the right to vote. So again, the fight's not over, right? But sometimes the way we tell the story, it's like, oh, women, you know, fought hard and marched and wrote letters, and then they finally got the right to vote in 1919, the end. But again, that's only the end for white people, right? For people of color, that's not the end of the story, right? The fight goes on for 40 more years until they too can gain the right to vote. Right? So again, there's a bit of a, you know, this story kind of illustrates, you know, how sort of sexual inequality is overcome, but it also illustrates how there's an intersection here between gender and race, and the racial thing is a whole other situation, right? So again, white women are, I'll talk about this tomorrow, but white women are privileged, right? They have privilege here, and so they're able to use it to gain the right to vote earlier. Black women, Indigenous women, women of Asian descent, they have to work much longer to get the exact same right? The exact same kind of privilege. Okay, that's all, you unwatered plants. I'm calling it there. Don't forget there's a quiz tomorrow. If you are an online person like you all are, you'll come in at 9 and write a quiz. If you're an online student, I will see you at 8 and we'll do the video conference thing as we normally do. Okay, so that is all. Don't forget tomorrow is Halloween. If you dress up, it'll be fun. Trust me, it's a fun day. So that's all for today. You can go and I'll see you tomorrow, okay? All right, see you.